Chapter 21. Thank Rerox, he made it, Cielo cried from their vantage point. They had snuck into an abandoned building which overlooked the old racetrack and had seen what Turf had been enduring so far. Hitch was wondering when the nail marks would heal in his forearm where Cielo had dug in her fingers, seeing Turf being tripped and stumbling to the ground. He had practically had to slap his hand over her mouth to silence her cry of triumph when Turf had made it over the finish line. They watched as the soldiers had dragged the man with the broken nose before Janix. In the army of the Dark Queen, there is no place for last place. The saying was a favourite of Janix that he liked to trot out several times a day. Now you serve to help train your betters. He addressed the man who remained downcast before him. Throwing back his arms and turning to the crowd, Janix announced, "With a live target for the archery range." The man's head whipped up as the crowd roared, live targets apparently being a fan favourite. An iron collar was snapped into place as the man was dragged across the parade ground. "Where are they taking him?" Cielo whispered. "How should I know, girlie? Watch and we'll both find out." Hitch snapped back. They did not have to wait long. The man was brought to a large thick wooden pole which had been driven into the ground. Suspicious reddy brown patches in the hard-packed dirt surrounded it. Kicking and cursing, the man was brought to the pole before his collar was attached to an anchored chain. One of the guards struck the man hard in the stomach, doubling him over, before they released him and stepped back. Someone handed Janix a curved black bow with a handful of arrows with barbed hunting tips. Stepping to within 20 paces, he stopped and drove the arrows into the dirt, point first, by his feet. "On your feet," Janix called to the man who began to rise. "Bring me the blonde boy." Cielo and Hitch both tensed, unsure of what was about to happen next to Turf, who was pushed and prodded forward before reluctantly walking the last few steps to stand in front of Janix. The grinning taskmaster handed him the bow. Turf looked confused at first, looking back and forth between the tethered man and Janix, before he leaned forward and whispered, "That iron collar could just as easily be around your neck if that man had his way." Turf's face hardened as he pulled an arrow from the ground and took aim at the man, who promptly started shuffling side to side, feigning to one side and then the other. "Oh, Turf, please don't do this." Cielo was almost on the verge of tears. "He's got no choice," Hitch said solemnly. Turf loosed the first arrow, the barbed head slicing through the air. The man dodged to one side, the arrow burying itself in the wooden pillar behind him. Plucking up another arrow before anyone could protest, Turf fired again, the arrow sticking into the ground at the man's feet. Turf jumped as he reached for the third arrow as Janix boomed. "A man who cannot shoot is just as useless to me as the man who falls behind." The meaning was all too clear. Turf stood with the bow lowered. The arrow knocked on the string. He lifted his chin slightly and stared straight at the man, who tried to watch where his eyes were looking. Turf's hands were up in an instant, drawing back the bowstring on the rise, the fingers loosening the shaft before it had even seemed to get to his eye level. The move had caught the man by surprise, a split-second delay preventing him from dodging out of the way in time. The arrow struck him in the pelvis, punching through flesh and muscle. "Ah!" The man let out a blood-curdling scream as he collapsed backwards onto the wooden pillar, leaning against it to help keep himself upright. Blood pumped from the wound running down his thigh to soak his calf. His face was already turning white. "Finish him! Finish him! Finish him!" The crowd chanted as Turf looked to Janix, who kept his gaze on the bleeding man, betraying no emotion. Turf reached for another arrow, plucking it from the dirt. His heart was thumping in his chest. He could feel his pulse in his ears as the roar of the crowd threatened to deafen him. Raising the bow, he kept his eyes locked on the target and felt no pity or compassion as he was swept up in the bloodlust of the mob. His target could hardly move. The distance was so short. It was an easy shot he had done 1,000 times before in the fields of his home with Cielo. The thought of her gave him pause for a moment, her face appearing before him. He wondered what she would think before pushing her out of his mind. She had left him behind. She was the reason, along with the others, why he was here. Releasing the arrow, he watched it sailing through the air, sure from the second he launched it that it would hit its target true. Oh! Cielo turned away as the arrow sunk into the man's outstretched hand, the palm held out far to vainly try and ward off the shot. The skin burst apart where the iron touched it, shattering the delicate bones beneath as it continued on, pinning his hand to his chest. Yeah! Woo! The crowd roared their cheers of approval as the man collapsed to the ground, blood freely pumping down his leg. Pale and gasping for air, he soon fell silent and was forgotten by the crowd as bets were paid and stories told about previous inductions of unwilling candidates. Turf was not allowed to savour his victory for long. The bow he had been holding was soon plucked from his hand, and Janax was again yelling orders. The soldiers returned to their cooking fires, dice games, and seemingly endless capacity to sleep. They shared the latest rumours about when they would be moving out and what their next target would be. A story was currently doing the rounds about a band of Solamnic knights that had ambushed and wiped out a patrol in Pinehurst and devastated another that had been sent to investigate. The farmers of the grassy plains were flocking to their banner, and soon they would march on Haltagoth itself. Each teller of the tale would assure their listeners of the reliability of their highly placed sources. Gossip is the lifeblood of any army, and the veterans would chuckle to themselves and go about their business, knowing that what they would face on the field almost never reflected the reports that came in. So they sharpened their swords and strung their bows, sure in the knowledge that everything bleeds. We've got to get him out of there. Cielo pled her case after they had joined up with the others and filled them in on what they had witnessed. Hitch had tried to keep things calm and professional, reporting on the size and layout of the encampment, movement of the guards, and possible escape routes if they managed to get Turf out of there. Cielo kept interrupting with snippets of what Turf had been forced to endure, and more than once Hitch had to hold up his hands to stop her ramblings. There is no way we can take them on in a straight fight. We are dealing with a small army. Hitch was thinking out loud. If we started a fire on the other side of town, it might not draw enough of them away, and Turf might be one of the group pressed into battling the blaze. He started to pace back and forth. When they march out onto the plains, we could try and shadow them. Camps in the field have sentries, and we wouldn't even know where to start looking inside the camp. Cielo's hopes kept getting raised and dashed with each idea that was proposed and quickly dismissed by Hitch. There must be something. We have to do something. Cielo cried as she wrung her hands. It was dawning on her now how much Turf really meant to her, now that she was facing the possibility of not seeing him again. She could only imagine what lay in store for him the following day, and shuddered at the thought that he might not live through it. We will do something, little one. We will. This is a problem I just can't seem to crack right now. They all bowed their heads for a moment, busying themselves with studying their shoes, while they tried to desperately think of something. They thought of fanciful ideas, like appearing at the town gates at the head of an army of shining knights, swooping in on a dragon like the one they had seen on the grassy plains. Others thought of their loved ones and prayed that wherever they were warm and safe with full bellies. A dark thought crept in their minds, though none would dare to speak it out loud. Why couldn't they just leave? It seemed like Turf was as good as dead now, and if he managed to live, he would be fighting under the banner of their hated enemy, who they have lost almost everything trying to resist against. The next time they might see him could be on a distant battlefield. Would he recognize them? Would he show them mercy or quarter? The thought of their friend, face streaked with blood, screaming as he charged at them with murderous intent, was too terrible to bear. Chickens! Someone cried as they jumped to their feet, a finger pointed into the air. Everyone flinched for a second as they turned their attention to the speaker, Girth Hayward. Hitch, you said you can't seem to crack the problem, and that got me thinking about cracking eggs and how eggs can be cracked. Hitch propped up his face with his fist, looking intently at the person as they suddenly hurried along with their explanation. You can crack the egg from the outside when you want to have breakfast, or if it has a baby chick, which cracks it from the inside. Finishing their proposal, they stood there with a big smile on their face, expecting the room to suddenly burst into applause, and were thoroughly confused when they did not. How do we get inside the camp to crack it? Hitch already said it was crawling with soldiers and guards. We'd never get in. They held up their hands to ward off any more detractors before they could explain further. The only people allowed in the camp are soldiers, so we'll join up and then bust turf out at night. Cielo turned to look expectantly at Hitch. Don't even think about it, young lady. There is no way you are coming with us into a place like that. A young woman and her virtue would soon be parted. Well, I won't be much safer out here by myself while you all go in there, will I? She retorted. Hitch, it's a bit late to stop including her, considering everything we've been through. Michael Weaver piped up, but was soon silenced by a withering glare from the dwarf. Are we really going to do this? George Cooper asked, daring to voice what others were thinking. We are going into the dragon's den here. There is no guarantee that any of us will make it out alive. Our families left, never knowing our fate. Everyone turned to them now, wearing solemn expressions. I agree. The risk is great, and the reward is just one man. How can we ask everyone to risk their lives? Would he do the same for us? Cielo was quick to come to his defense, reminding them how he alone had jumped back down into that sewer to help pull Hitch to safety. Voices started to be raised again, and Hitch stepped into the middle of the crowd and held up his hands. I will go. I will not think any less of any man who does not. I alone owe the boy that much. He said with a heavy heart. They were so close to putting this all behind them. How easy it would be to sneak off in the night. Let the knights of the northern plains and the gnomes in their mountains stand against this rising tide of darkness. Let them clash with ringing steel as limbs are hacked off in fountains of blood. Let the teenage boys dreaming of vain glory lay screaming for their mothers as their guts spilled out into the dirt. Let the bellies of the crow grow fat of the dead as their pouches are pilfered by unscrupulous men as he had seen before on 100 battlefields in the days of his youth. Because if you want something done right, you get a dwarf. He thought to himself before chuckling under his breath as he walked away from the others.